This just striking video of Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey wearing a mask and crying at George Floyd's funeral at the foot of his casket. And Mayor Jacob Frey's political theater bent is coming back again. He dropped the F-bomb, kind of strategically in a recent press conference telling ICE to get the F out of Minnesota. And then he goes on to do an interview with Vanity Fair magazine about dropping the F-bomb. And I think that makes most people think this is a woke mayor who is doing things like giving a victory speech in a foreign language. Here he is at a rally for the Somalian community. But I think there's actually a lot more going on to the story of Jacob Frey and of Minneapolis. He recently had to fend off a challenge from a Democratic Socialist candidate for mayor, Omar Fatah. This is Omar Fatah here. They were calling him the Mamdani of the Midwest. And originally, Fatah was endorsed by Democrats until they revoked their endorsement of him. And I learned that there are these pretty hardcore progressives in the city that championed Omar Fatah. And ironically, Jacob Frey is the moderate voice in Minneapolis. In fact, when they wanted to defund the police fully, abolish the police force in Minneapolis, Jacob Frey said, "I do not support the full abolition of the police department." So despite all his theater, listen to what the crowd says. So it seems like Jacob Frey realized that he needed to basically perform political theater while keeping Minneapolis together so that it doesn't just totally go off the rails. So what he did is he assembled a group of wealthy people and business people, honestly, to put this question on the ballot in a recent election that gave more power to the mayor and shifted it away from the hyper-progressive city council, and it passed, while quietly and successfully moving to have the police reform movement on the ballot fail in that same election. And a lot of people who observe what's going on in Minneapolis are saying that there's something rotten going on with the politics there, and there is a lot going on there. So, for example, there was this all of MPLS PAC that basically was funding Jacob Frey's side of things, the more moderate, if you can even call it that, versus the Minneapolis for the Mini, which was kind of the extreme progressive political action committee. And it turns out that Jacob Frey, the same guy wearing the mask and crying in the early part of this video, actually received his political action money from developers, the Minneapolis Regional Chamber of Commerce, and even Lyft. But interestingly, on the other side, the hyper-progressive political action committee that supported Omar Fatah received a bunch of money from out-of-state millionaires who were supporting Zohran Mamdani. So no wonder places like Democracy Now! Were comparing Omar Fatah to Mamdani. They were getting money from literally the same places, lots of times from out of state. The Minneapolis Times did a report on this and found that the hyper-progressive PAC behind Omar Fatah and the Abolish Police movement received more than $200,000 from out-of-state donors. Like this guy, Idris Mokhtarzada from Washington, D.C. He is an entrepreneur that built a platform called webs.com. Here's the dude here. Here's his LinkedIn profile. He calls himself an angel investor. He gave the hyper-progressive political action committee in Minneapolis $50,000. And there's more. Rehan Munid Azar, $25,000. He is a Harvard Law graduate from Morton Grove, Illinois. Fahim Zaman, $25,000 from Jackson Heights, New York, Harvard graduate. And this university connection is going to come back. Omar Hassan from Wet Redwood City, California, that's the heart of Silicon Valley, $50,000, donated $250,000 to Zohran Mamdani stuff. Mohammed Javad, $40,000 donated to the hyper-progressive stuff in Minneapolis. He is currently living in New York. Another $250,000 to Mamdani's campaign. And I told you the university connection is going to come back, and that's because there is this city council member in Minneapolis. This is her right here. And her name is Robin Wansley Warloba. And she is currently pursuing her doctorate degree in gender, women, and sexuality studies at the University of Minnesota. So she has kind of served as a liaison between the hyper-progressive parts of the University of Minnesota and the Minneapolis city government. The University of Minnesota, for example, has this organization called CURA, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs. And you're going to see they basically publish research that they can then use the brand of the University of Minnesota to say that university researchers recommend something. And then these hyper-progressives will say, look, the university says we should do that. So here it is, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs. They publish this report, and this is used as justification for abolishing the police. It turns out that their research was interviews of 112 Northside residents asking them for their policy recommendations. And of course, all this is happening in the backdrop of this massive fraud that's sweeping all of Minnesota's social services, including that a top aide to Jacob Frey was not only named in a lawsuit over defrauding a meals program for low-income children, he pled guilty. Abdi Nur Salah was this senior aide who used at least $1 million of misappropriated money to buy himself properties in Minneapolis. Here's the dude here with Mayor Frey. And all this stuff and something else I'm going to tell you about here shortly makes me wonder about the future of Minneapolis. There are a bunch of large corporations in Minneapolis: United Health Group, Target, Best Buy, 3M, General Mills, big corporations. And Target, which is in the area, faced a boycott from Minneapolis residents because they rolled back a DEI program. So they're in a city where these people in the city are boycotting them. And I told you there's a new ripple to this, and that's that Minnesota introduced this paid leave program that just took effect like a few days ago. Any employee in the state is eligible for 20 weeks of paid leave a year. That is 5 months. So I looked on the state of Minnesota's website to see, like, how does this program work? What do you have to do to take 20 weeks off of paid leave in a given year? Five months. Basically, any medical condition, including mental health, qualifies. Paternity or maternity leave, to care for a family member with some type of health condition, or if you go through something like a serious breakup or you're feeling threatened in some way related to your romantic life, you can take paid leave to care for yourself or others. And 20 weeks of paid leave is a lot of paid leave. So of course, in the first week, thousands of people applied for 20 weeks of paid leave, 18,000 people in the first week. And now that immigration agents are in Minneapolis, Minneapolis residents are setting up these homemade barricades. So I'm just wondering, what is going on in Minneapolis?